Gym Candy Part 5, Chapter 6. Our next 3 games were against Roosevelt, Inglemoor, and Juanita, the weakest teams in the league. When I saw them on the schedule, I started picturing the long runs I'd make against them. But before the Roosevelt game, Carlson called me into his office. "I'm going to cut back on the number of carries you get for a few games. Mick," he said, "I'm going to open up the passing game more, run Kane out there to give you a breather. You're still our number 1 running back. I just don't want to wear you out." It was the exact strategy Downs hadn't used the year before. "Coach," I said, "I'm not wearing out at all. I feel great. I can carry the ball as much as you want. I get stronger as the game goes on." He drummed his fingers on the top of his desk and then slid a piece of paper to me. "There's your breakdown, quarter by quarter, for the Garfield game." I looked at the sheet. In the first quarter, I'd gained 92 yards. In the second, it was 31. In the third, only 17. "But that's because the game changed," I protested. "We got ahead and—" "Mick," Carlson said, "you'll play when I say." When I complained to my dad, he shut me down. "Smart coach," he said. "After your fast start, every team you face will be scheming to stop you. Drew clicks on a few touchdown passes to Deshaun. They'll be forced to drop the linebackers and safeties back a few steps, and that should open things up for you. And letting that other kid take some hits, that won't hurt you late in the season." It all made sense, but one thing clouded the picture: those yardage stats. I hadn't known I'd dropped off so dramatically. Tuesday at the tail end of practice, we watched the game films. Guys all cheered my big touchdown run, but after that it was grinded out game. I studied my own performance. As the game progressed, I wasn't as quick off the snap, not as fast to the corners. On a couple of plays, there had been gaping holes that somehow I'd missed instead of running right into tacklers. When the film session was over, I was too quiet, and Drew noticed. "What's eating you?" "You saw the films. After the first quarter, I did nothing." "What are you talking about? You got the hard yards, Mick, the first downs on 3rd and 2. They knew we weren't passing. They were keyed entirely on you. So you didn't break any long ones, so what? You're the league's leading rusher. You're playing on an unbeaten team. Enjoy it." That made me feel better, but I was determined to make the most of my chances against Roosevelt. I worked hard at practice and hard at Popeyes after practice. I wanted to break a couple long runs. Sometimes, though, the harder you try, the worse you do. That's what happened against Roosevelt. I kept running into my blockers or tripping over defenders or taking the ball outside when I should have cut it back against the grain. I had 11 carries for 47 yards, and my longest run was a paltry 8 yards. I did score a touchdown, and we did win 27-6, but the feeling afterward was nothing like it when the first 2 games, and there were no headlines in the paper. Carlson didn't say anything, good or bad, about my performance, but my dad did. "You look sluggish out there." "I just never found my rhythm," I said. He nodded. "Yeah, I know the feeling. It's hard to get up for a bad team. You'll break one next week." But it was more of the same against Inglemoor. Drew and Deshaun clicked big time, so we won 48-6. I carried the ball 9 times for 46 yards. Nothing wrong with those stats, but nothing particularly right about them either. The Inglemoor game was on a Saturday night. Sunday morning I drove to Popeyes. Peter was there, and he gave me a quick wave, but he didn't come over to ask how I'd played. I went to the cables and started to do some curls, but my shoulders hurt, and so did my back. 9 carries, and I ached all over. Peter was working with Paul Krause, a guy in his late 20s. Most lifters who use steroids were secretive about it, but not Krause. I'd heard him talk about his favorite drugs as if he were describing toppings for a pizza. Now he is standing in front of the mirror, bench pressing 200 pounds in perfect rhythm, inhaling, exhaling, his arms moving from flexed to straight to flexed. He would work for another hour, and tomorrow he wouldn't hurt like I hurt. The first time the D-ball had kicked in, I'd felt strong, just like Krause felt strong. And as those weeks rolled by, I'd kept feeling stronger, which was the opposite of what was happening to me now, when with every passing day, I felt weaker. The temptation was right in front of me. I could walk over to Peter, talk to him for 30 seconds, and pay him his money. Within a week, the steroids would be working their magic. I'd be back on the train. I'd be stronger and faster, with less pain. I looked around, feeling panicked. I had to get away, and I had to get away fast. I stopped right in the middle of a set, dropped the weights, walked out of Popeyes, and got into the Jeep. I started it up and then sat, engine idling. Where was I going? What was I going to do? I pulled out my cell phone and punched in Drew's number. "How are you feeling?" I said when he answered. He groaned. "How do you think? I'm sore all over." I laughed a little. "Me too. But I'm also bored out of my mind. You want to do something? Maybe miniature golf?" "I'll tell you what I want to do. I want to lie in bed all day with a heating pad taped to my ribs. I think every single one of them is broken." "Come on, Drew. I'm in serious pain here. I don't feel like doing anything." After I closed my cell phone, I sat looking out at the Fremont Bridge. There was no one else I could call. That's when my cell phone rang. I flipped it open. All right, Drew said. Miniature golf it is. I'll meet you in half an hour at Interbay, but you're probably going to have to take the ball out of the hole for me. I don't think I can bend. No problem, I said. Glad to do it. See you in half an hour. I shut the phone and then leaned my head against the steering wheel and closed my eyes. He'd saved me from myself. I could breathe again. Here, Mick is facing that temptation. How easy would it be to go over to Peter, right, get the drugs that he needs, and be, outperforming and breaking records again in no time, right? A little over a week. He'd be back to that. But he's trying to stay off of that stuff. And the temptation is there, though. So he leaves the gym. He calls Drew, his only friend, right? Only friend that's continually reached out to him, and asks if he wants to go play golf. Drew's the quarterback, so he's pretty beat up from the game. He's like, no, I don't. I just want to lay here. And so Mick hangs up the phone. But Drew, he realizes that Mick is going through some stuff. And even though he doesn't know what it is, he knows his friend is not in a good place. And so Drew calls him back and is like, yep, okay, we can go play miniature golf. So time and again, we see Drew being a true friend to Mick and really trying to save him and reach out to him, even though Mick never opens up to him. That week, I took a different approach. I did everything I could to conserve my energy, to save every ounce of strength for the game. Instead of working super hard at Popeyes, I cut back, using lighter weights and concentrating more on stretching out my muscles than building them up. I needed a good game Friday night against Juanita. I needed it for my confidence, and I needed it to give Carlson confidence in me. Everything he'd said after the Inglemore game was positive, but I knew what was happening. Dave Kane was playing better and better every week. His star was shining brighter, and mine was fading. Instead of being the number one option in the offense, I'd become just one of the options. In the warm-ups before the game, I tried to judge my readiness. Were my legs strong? Was my first step explosive? Was I mentally ready? I thought so, but I'd thought so when we played Roosevelt and Inglemore. We won the toss and took the opening kickoff. Our first two plays were passes. Both of them were completions, one to Bo Johnson and the other to Deshaun. I was figuring on another pass play, but Drew leaned forward and said the magic words, 34 draw on 3. Juanita came with the blitz. Drew sold the pass perfectly and slipped the ball into my arms, and I was past the first wave of defenders before they even knew it was a running play. My legs felt strong as I burst past the 50-yard line. A linebacker was closing, but I dipped left, did a 180-degree spin, and he missed me. A little stutter step followed by a quick burst took care of the safety, and I had enough speed to take it all the way to the end zone before the final cornerback reached me. It was a shot of confidence I needed. As I crossed the goal line, all the clouds that had been hanging over me were blown away. Just as I'd blown away the linebacker, I turned around, expecting to see my teammates streaking down the field towards me. Instead, I saw the referee picking up the yellow penalty flag. The call was against us, holding. The play was coming back. My touchdown was erased. I should have shaken it off. Penalties are a part of the game. You just go out there and do it again. It wasn't as if Juanita had a ferocious defense. No big deal, that's what I told myself. But after that play, I couldn't get a spark. Instead of feeling fast and full of fight, I felt heavy and strangely unmotivated, almost as if I weren't really playing the game, but instead watching it from somewhere inside my head. I didn't stink up the place. 10 carries, 40 yards, 1 touchdown. Dave Kane carried the ball about the same number of times for the same number of yards, maybe a few more. We won the game 32-12, our 5th straight win, but my 3rd straight mediocre game. So we're thinking about how Mick is playing. He's playing pretty decent, right? He's not bad, obviously, at the game, but he doesn't have all of these record-breaking plays, all this kind of spotlight on him as the star of the team that he did at the beginning of the season. Heather's birthday party was the next day. I had told her I'd be there, and she said that Kaylee would be glad. That morning came up cold, gray, and blustery. I cleaned the gutters for my dad, which took a couple of hours. After lunch, I drove over to Popeyes, but instead of going in, I walked along the Fremont Cut, frozen to the bone by the sharp wind and the constant rain. Was I just having a downtime? Every player has times when nothing seems to go right. Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, all the great ones have lousy games, and I hadn't been that bad. I thought about the touchdown run that had been called back and how that might have changed everything for me. Just hang in there, I told myself. Things have to start breaking my way. They just have to. I drove home. Heather's party started at 6. Pizza, then swimming, then cake. Why didn't it sound good? Did you remember to buy Heather a gift? My mom said as I headed out the door. I hadn't. There's a Starbucks across the street from the pool. I'll get her a gift card. Have fun. I was halfway up Finney Ridge when I remembered my swimsuit. It was wrapped up in a towel by the side of my bed. I turned on Greenwood and started to circle back, and then I just didn't want to do any of it. Go back home, go to Starbucks, go to the swim party. Nothing felt worth it. Instead, I drove the Jeep out to the I-5 and drove up the Bellingham, the whole time thinking about the new stuff, the XTR, Peter had just told me about. If I did use it once, just to find out if it really worked, how bad would that really be? I didn't know what the other guys were using. Number 50 from Foothill, Drew and Deshawn had been suspicious of him. They'd been suspicious of Foothill's whole team. I stopped at a Starbucks in the Fairhaven neighborhood and had an Odwall and a bagel, taking as long as I could, my mind going and going. Being a cheater, that's not how I wanted to think of myself. But I didn't want to be stupid either. Guys use caffeine drinks all the time. Some guys even took caffeine pills. In one league, a supplement would be legal. In another, the same one would be banned. None of the rules made much sense when you stepped back and thought them through. I stayed at Starbucks for about an hour. Afterward, I found a Barnes & Noble and killed another hour looking at magazines, but really thinking the same thoughts. Instead of I-5, I took Chuckanut Drive home. As I drove along the Sound, a sudden fear chilled me. What if Drew called my house and asked where I was? I worried about that for 10 miles or so until it hit me that Drew didn't care much if I was there or not. I could picture him sitting by the pool with Deshawn. He'd be eating pizza and staring at the girls in their swimsuits. We'd been best friends once. That we weren't anymore was my fault. When I got home, the house was dark. The next morning, my mom asked how the party had been. It was great, I said. A lot of fun. Okay, so again, we have this theme of isolation with Mick, right? He's been invited to this party, right? People are still inviting him to go do things. And he has said, yes, he's going to go. And then he starts to have one of his downward spirals where he's questioning everything in his life. You know, what if I end up just taking the XTR? Is that really cheating? But I want to be the best one out there. And so he spirals and decides that he doesn't want to go to the party and just kind of drives around and does stuff by himself. Again, isolating himself from everyone around him who cares about him and would be there for him if he just told them the truth.